So this is our fourth session of Hilchot Avelut. Now we're really getting more into the more common things of Avelut, but as a follow-up for what we left off last week, which was the issue of end of life and DNR, do not resuscitate, and all these issues. Those are really complicated issues. People wrote to me and asked, to have more on that. I contacted a good friend who's an expert on the field. Is a psychiatrist and a chaplain of a leading hospital, and he agreed to join. Is now traveling, but when he'll come, we're going to have a panel, and people could submit questions. We could have a more interactive discussion of that, and suggest solutions and ideas what to do. But again, I think that it's very important to read in this context the books by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, especially that book that I mentioned, Death is Vital for Life. Death is of vital importance. Thank you, Shmuel. Yeah, I wrote it. I read it in Hebrew. So death is of vital importance. It's an amazing book, and I think in between the lines you read guidance of what to do, how to talk to people, how to listen. That's the most important thing: is to listen, to let people open up, even if it's moments before death. It's amazing, how that conversation, the dialogue, can change their perspective and lead them towards a better state of mind when they say farewell. Another important thing that I recommend watching is a movie called Alive Inside. It's a documentary, Alive Inside. I'm sharing it now in I think it's on Netflix. This documentary was it follows the story of someone who worked in nursery home, old age care, and he worked with people with dementia, Alzheimer, and other problems like that. People forget so much about themselves, and they become like an empty shell. It's really difficult for them and the family. And what he found out, something amazing, that later on, talking to psychiatrists and psychologists, they explained what happened. Is that people remember music in a very deep way, because the music is processed in the most primitive part of our mind. So those are the first memories that we have. So even with people who lost their memory, or in certain stages of Alzheimer or dementia, there are memories of music from a very early age, from when they were younger than 20 years old. And when you play this music to them, they sort of come back to life. I mean, that doesn't work with everyone. You have to watch the movie and see how it works. But I know from experience that when I visited, for example, in the Iraqi community in LA, where I was the rabbi in Kal Joseph, and I would sit with people, and there was nothing that much that I could say except for sing some of the traditional songs. It really changed them completely. So if you have to know what is the musical tradition of that person, when did he or she, where and when did they grow up, and if you get some of this music today, almost everything is available on YouTube and iTunes, and you play it to them, that could be very helpful. So I recommend watching this Alive Inside. And Shmuel, again, thank you so much for sharing the link. And I think also it's on Netflix. So let's go. We will go to Siman chapter 340 in Yoreh De'ah, which we're going to do today through Sefaria, because we have the English here. And okay, day 339 we did 340. So in that Siman, the shulhan-arukh speaks about Keri'a, about tearing the clothes. So how much do you have to tear? The exact location of it, for whom do you have to do Keri'a, and at what time? And the interesting thing to note, even before we go into the text, is that most of these things are not practiced today. If we want to sum it up very briefly, very simply, say what is a practice today, we would say that people do Keri'a only for the 7 immediate relatives: spouses, children, siblings, parents. And most people do it after the burial, not at the time of death. Some people do their garment, some people do a ribbon. But in shulhan-arukh, we'll see that that things are different. It says one must do Keri'a, he must do it standing. If he did it while sitting, he did not fulfill the obligation. However, remember we said halakha kedivrei mekel be'avel. We always go with the more lenient opinion regarding avelut, and since the tearing the clothes is just to show sorrow and to help us also display our feelings, if one did it and does not want to do it again, you don't push them. If it's very difficult to tell someone, "Oh, you didn't mourn the right way." We shouldn't really say that. We have to assess what are the standards of the community, what are the family's expectations. If someone comes to you and says, "I feel I didn't do the right thing," so what do? First, you say you did the right thing, because we don't need to add guilt to what is already happening, and it's a very common thing. People would feel guilty when someone who's dear to them passes away, whether they had something to do with it or not. Rabbi Kushner, Harold Kushner, in his book about when bad things happen to good people, bring the story of 2 congregants that lost their mother more or less at the same time. One of them kept blaming himself for keeping his mother in New York and not sending her to Florida where there was better weather. She would have felt better. The other one kept blaming himself for sending his mother to Florida. If she would have stayed with him, she would feel better. So no matter what we do, people feel guilty. In some metaphysical way, like that we think that we could have done something and we didn't. So the mourner doesn't need us to tell him, "Oh yeah, you didn't do it right. That's the right way to do it." What we can say is, what you did was right, was perfect. But if you feel that you want to do more, if you feel the need to display your sorrow in a different way, let's go ahead and do it. You could do it. And one example that I had, a case that I had, only I didn't respond right away because I was visiting my father's synagogue, and the person came to ask him, so I didn't want to tell him in front of him. But a young boy who lost his father, was maybe 13, 14, orphan, came to ask if he could continue saying Kaddish after the year. And my father, who started learning halakha at a later age and was influenced by Kabbalah, and he knows that you're not supposed to say Kaddish not in the right time, immediately said no. But I took him aside later on and I said, "Listen, what you could do is keep on saying Kaddish if you feel that you need to say it." Because as a young boy, felt that he didn't make up for the lost yet with the Kaddish. And if you're concerned about the idea of the Kabbalah that you don't say Kaddish not in the right time, have in mind that you're saying Kaddish for all the anonymous people who died in the Holocaust, at wars, in disasters, and there's no one to say Kaddish for them. And for that reason, whenever I'm in the synagogue and they want to say Kaddish but there's no one to say it, I'll say it. And I always have in mind that I do it for those who have no relatives to say Kaddish for them. The place in entry 2, he says, the place to tear is anywhere along the neck, but if he did it at the back or in the front, lo yatsa, he did not fulfill his obligation. The Rama says, some say that it does work, and that is the minhag, and that's what we do today. We don't really have a bet hatzavar. When he speaks of bet hatzavar, it's not the collar that we have today. They speak of a robe that was sewn on the top, sort of a circle, like a ring. We don't have that. Again, it's about the norm of what people do. Shi'or Keri'a tefa, we have, it's about a hand breadth, about 4 inches, 5 inches, and one can add, not very common today, we know all the halachot that we spoke about already of what happens, mishet chafu metav, so that one tragedy happened after another. Thank God it's not very common today. In the past, when there were diseases or wars, it could have happened that people would be in mourning consecutively. It still happens. I had several cases like that, very tragic, but people don't do Keri'a separately. If one lost more than one relative at once, he will do one Keri'a. But believe me, if that happens, the Keri'a is nothing compared to what the person is really experiencing. It's not. Here the Keri'a becomes really trivial compared to the sorrow that a person has. In entry 4, shulhan-arukh says the same as you have to tear to rend for a near of kin, you also have to rend in the presence of his near of kin when he sustains a bereavement. Again, we don't do that. That's what the Mishnah says, the mitabel alav mitabel imo. The one that you mourn for, you mourn with. This was part of a social norm, the way people live together. And shulhan-arukh says you have to rent for your father-in-law, mother-in-law, but the Rama says we don't do it today. That is possible also that the shulhan-arukh did not want people to do that, but that is part of the methodology of the shulhan-arukh to sometimes put things on the table even though we don't follow them as of the ideal. Just in case some people do them, they will have the proof in the shulhan-arukh. This is an important thing to remember, that the shulhan-arukh did not present us with a clear-cut halacha, but rather he gives options. In many cases, gives options, especially when you compare what he writes in the shulhan-arukh to his commentary in the Bet Yosef, which is a commentary on the Tur. In Siman 5, in entry 5, he says, "Ha'omed b'shat yetzi'ah shel ish o isha miYisrael hayav likroa." If one is present when a Jew dies, one must rend his clothes. We could add to that if one is present at the death of anyone that he feels sorrow for, Jew or non-Jew, he should rend his clothes. We are in mourning for what has happened. If we don't do it here, we don't do it there. It's again a question of how a person feels. It's interesting here. The shulhan-arukh goes into the discussion who is considered worthy of having that rending of the clothes. If he is an observant person, if he did avera or something like that. But again, this is not something that we calculate. The Rama goes into that to say, does he do it regularly? Does he worship idols? Would they convert to another religion? But at least they have this discount. Someone who abandoned the community, lives in a different lifestyle. You don't want to mourn him, but if their children died, you mourn for them because you understand that those children had no choice in their life because they were brought up in that manner. In entry 6, the shulhan-arukh says that for just a regular person, Adam Kasher, a worthy person, you don't know that he was not a great scholar, but also not someone who was not observant. You have to rend your clothes. As long as you're present anywhere between the time of passing and the burial. And the Rama says, "En hayav likro al adam kasher." You don't have to do it unless you're present at the time of death. Aval hayav livkot ulitaber alav. You must mourn and cry for him, and that's the minhag. So again, we see one entry after another. The shulhan-arukh says we do it. Rama says we don't do it, and in practice we don't do it today. Anyone who would come and say, "I want to restore it to what the shulhan-arukh says," it's not going to happen. Just because we our social norms have changed. Here it mentions Hacham, Tamid Hacham, a scholar, also something we don't do. A rabbi, a master, all these things, all these halachot that you could review later because we really don't do them. All these halachot are in a way taken almost directly from Masechet Semachot that we reviewed briefly. But Masechet Semachot was written towards the end of the 9th century, so it's the time of the Geonim, and a lot has changed since then. Here's another thing that we don't do. For all other dead, one rends to the extent of a handbreadth in the uppermost garment, so only the exterior garment. But for parents, he goes all the way down until he exposes his chest. We don't do that today. We do only one garment, and the garments that people tear, rend, is usually the shirt for men, and also a t-shirt or a shirt that on top of it you wear a sweater for women. The customs regarding women are different. Depends on your community. Wherever you are, you have to ask what people do. In some places, the women do it in the cemetery. In other places, they do it at home. And it's not the rabbi or the cantor or anyone of the Chava Kadisha who does that, but rather a woman does it out of respect and from modesty. So the shulhan-arukh says here, there's no comment from the Rema, but this also we don't do. Both men and women do the same with rendering their clothes. A woman rends the inner garment, turns it around so the tear will be on the back, and then she tears the upper garment. This is not done today. There are several other differences that the shulhan-arukh brings here between a father and mother and all other relatives. When you do it, whether you do it publicly or privately, for other people you do it, you could do it privately. For the parents, publicly. For all other, you do it by hand or by with a knife. But for a father and mother, it has to be by hand. For all others, one can change clothes within 7 days, and he doesn't have to rend them. But for his parents, he has to rend everything that he changes. Interesting to note, that is a halakha that was forgotten to the direction of being strict. Here, the shulhan-arukh says that one could change his clothes within the shiva. I'm sure that in most places that you visited, you see that people do not change the upper shirt, the shirt that they tore during the shiva. But like the shulhan-arukh says, it is acceptable. The reason that people don't do it is the perception of the community. People are coming to visit them. They will think they did not rend their shirts. So what some people do, they will change, and even though it's not for the parents, they will rend that shirt as well. But also, that's interesting. Depends on the person. I've seen people who come to the burial and they would wear a t-shirt or a simple shirt underneath because they don't want to ruin an expensive shirt, right? So when you see that, you already know that person doesn't feel deep sorrow. If you're really devastated by that death, you're not going to think now about a difference of $30 or $40 or even $100 of a shirt that you're wearing. You just you go with it, and whatever happens. This is when people rationalize. They think the time has come. Usually, when they feel a person lived his life and or they were maybe not in very good relationship with them. But when a person is really touched by what has happened, they don't care which part, what garment are you going to tear, except for the idea of exposure, of course, that they have to be done in a way which is modest and respectful to them. Halakha 15, this is something that totally irrelevant today, and that's fixing or sewing the torn garment. That comes from a period where people were poor, could not afford, or garments. They weren't poor; garments were relatively expensive for their income. So, but today we don't do that. Most people just throw it away. In Halakha 16 speaks about bearing the shoulder, which we don't do today. Same in Halakha 17, so we're going to skip that. Halakha 18. What happens if you hear only after a long time has passed? If you only heard after 30 days, so you don't do Keri'a. But for a father, mother, one would do always. This is also almost irrelevant today because of means of communication. We know right away. halacha 19, 20, 21, all these things up to up to 24 speaks about fixing a torn garment to wear it again, or what happens if one happened within the other, if you have to add another tear. I said it's not very common, and if that happens, we have many more other things to worry about than the Keri'a of that moment of death. And if the burial happens to be at the same time, as one case that I had when there was a burial of a parent and his child that died in an accident. We did not require to do two separate Keri'ot. That would be too much. Already the heart was torn. So again, we have to use our common sense and judgment when we tell people what to do. As well, this next halakha, if someone was sick, the translation here is not accurate, but it's fine. Someone who's ill passed out, and the person who was standing there thought that he died, and he tore his clothes, and then that person came back to life, or so regained consciousness, and then he died. So here we go into this minimalist halakha. Did it happen within which is 10 seconds or not? I think that here you could rely on the same concept of just be mekel. What is that person wants? If that the person who tore his clothes feels that he did already, then he's done. If he needs to do it again, he could do it again. Okay. This an important halacha. Halacha 30. Katan. We mentioned briefly when we started the discussion. Katan de lo kimnan be shekalu lo chodashav shemed betoch 30 afilu beyom 30 en korein alav. For a child regarding whom we do not know for certain that its month of pregnancy were complete, who died within 30 days from birth, or even on the 30th day, we do not rend garments. Okay, that comes from a period where there are a couple of things here. One is that people didn't fully understand the concept of pregnancy and the gestation period. So what they saw was that preemies who were born after 7 months had higher survival rates than those who were born after 8 months. So a fetus that was born on a preemie of the 8th month had lesser survival rates than who were born on the 7th month, right? So they came to the conclusion. The rabbis came to the conclusion, but that it was based also on whatever the Greek science of the period provided them with. They came to the conclusion that there are two gestation periods for humans, 9 months and 7 months, and therefore they believe that a preemie that was born after 7 months actually is called kalul chodashav. He had that fetus, that child had full term, and he's the shorter one. He's like the express baby. Okay, whereas the one that was born after 8 months is someone who had to stay until the 9th month and just came out early, and therefore this is the katan shelo kalul chodashav. And for them, it was not considered alive until a month has passed. They were not sure that he's still alive, and therefore, if that child died, they would not sit shiva for the child. They would not mourn. Today, I believe it's different. I told you about a case that I help with of stillbirth, that the family needed to sit shiva, the family needed to do something, and even if it's not, even before stillbirth, if there's a case of an abortion that was during advanced pregnancy, people thought, they were expecting the child. When that happened to us, fifth month, so many people came out telling us that it happened to them as well, that we didn't know. But at the time, we were in a haze. The Heva Kadisha came, picked up whatever they picked up, buried where they buried. We didn't know anything, and I don't think we had, as a couple, a time to digest it and to work over it until the next child was born. So, if you, as a rabbi, as a leader, as a teacher, as a chaplain, you encounter a situation where you know that people want and need that time of sitting shiva and mourning in a way with people around them, it's important and help them to do it. I'll go 1 second to the comments because people were asking about hayav and asur and mutar. all these terms. When you say hayav, is hayav midrabanan, not it's a rabbinical obligation. Asur, biblical rabbinical obligation or prohibition. Nothing here is biblical. There's nothing with Hilchot Avelut that is biblical. There is a debate, which we'll see later on, regarding onen, the status of onen, which is the first day of burial. Some people argue that onen yom rishon, the first day of burial, the onenut, the status of onenut, is biblical. But I think that there's sort of a misunderstanding. What when they said that onen, the first day, is biblical midoraita, they meant that regarding the laws that apply to the kohen or to rituals in the temple, entering the temple, his status is not in his hand. He doesn't choose whether to be an onen or not, but rather the Torah imposes it on him, blocking him, barring him from going into the temple. But in any other thing, to say hayav, asur, obligated or forbidden from doing certain things, when it comes to Avelut, it's all at the end of the day, it's given to our judgment, that the judgment of the person who's asked the question as a rabbi, but also that of the mourner, how that person feels, and taking into account the community, how it's going to be perceived by the community, and how much that person cares, or how much the person who passed away would have cared about that, and also how much the person who passed away would have cared about what their relatives would do, right? For example, I had a discussion today with someone who lost a parent, and the question was what with certain events during the year. I said, what would your father want for you? Think about that. Your father passed in an advanced age. How do you feel about his life? He said he lived a full life. And how he would feel what would he feel about you not attending this wedding or not doing this activity because he passed away? He said he would be upset. He would want me to rejoice. So those are things that are not, you can't put a sticker on them and say, you do this, you do that. You have to assess situations with people to understand the rules and to work with people toward finding a solution or striking a balance in their observance of the halakha. Another example I could give you of someone who lost her mother, a woman who lost her mother, and she decided to be very strict and not listen to music the whole year, even recorded music. Her husband told me that at a certain point he felt that she's losing her sanity because she didn't have that ability to just sit and listen to music that would calm her. And he said, I asked Rabbi Ovadia, and he said that you could listen to music, that it's okay. And she decided to do it, and it completely changed her. It was very beneficial for her. It's not a question of sorrow, but rather a question of common sense and maintaining our sanity. But we'll get also to music and parties later on. In entry 31, halacha 31, he says, "En kora'in b'yom tov אפילו ביום טוב שני של גלויות, אפילו קרובים של מת. You don't rend the garments on Yom Tov, even if it's the second day in outside Eretz Israel. And when he says even the second day, it's because if someone passed away on Yom Tov, you could do the burial on the second day of Yom Tov by using non-Jewish workers. So afilu krovim shel met. But on Hol HaMoed, you could rend garments. Shamar baregel shmua krova korea. Not everybody does that today. People wait. I mean, they do it at the burial, but not for shmuah. Here it says that you one rents his garments for hearing when he hears that someone died. Even if you calculate that if you would have waited until after the holiday, it would be called a distant, meaning a belated news. Some people would do today, if there's no way to communicate easily, they would wait to make it a delayed announcement. But the practice would be that if someone heard that one of his relatives, siblings, children, parents, spouse, passed away, and it's during the holiday, and he won't be able to make it to the burial, he will do the Keri'a. But the custom today is not to do the Keri'a on the moment of hearing, but rather wait until the burial to do it. Okay, halachot 33 to 35 irrelevant today. 36 korein shmot raot we don't do today. One must rend garments on hearing bad news. So, for example, when we heard about the shooting in Pittsburgh, or the shooting today, or yesterday in Chicago, it doesn't matter if Jews or not Jews. Technically, we have to rent our clothes. But if we would have done that with the non-stop flood of news that we have today, we should really, our clothes would have would become a sieve. But people just don't do that today. Al Shmot Raot. Same thing, 37. It's not something that we're going to hear commonly. Blasphemy, or God forbid, a burned Sefer Torah or Tefillin, etc. That is Halacha 38. One who sees the cities of Yehuda or Yerushalayim in ruins must rend his clothes. And some people do it. The last visit that I had in the Kotel in the summer, I saw someone doing that. He did it outside the gate because he did it with a razor that he couldn't bring into the place because of security. He had to leave it with security. But that became a serious problem for Jews who migrated to Israel in the 1800s. From the Ashkenazi community, they felt that they have to do Keri'a. They weren't sure if they had to do Keri'a every time they see the temple, or just if it's irregular. So some said that if you see it within 30 days of the first time, you don't have to tear your clothes again. Today, I believe that most people understand that we don't do that, even though the temple is not built yet. But we can't call Yerushalayim Ir Hareva. It's not a destroyed city, but thank God, Yerushalayim is flourishing. We control at least part of the of the area of the temple, and we are going forward. So one does not have to do that. Just as we don't do it for a scholar, for a great Talmid Chacham, or for any other person, that also this is something that we don't do. Okay, so that is Siman 340 in shulhan-arukh. Siman 341. That's where we talk about aninut. The idea of aninut, dinei onen. Onen is it comes from the word on in Hebrew, which is sorrow. It is first mentioned in the words of Rachel when she gave birth to Binyamin. She called him Ben Oni, meaning the son of my sorrow. On also means strength in Hebrew, but in that context it's sorrow. So the onen is someone who's dead, whoever passed away, was not buried yet. So he doesn't have what we call today closure. He can't really start mourning in the way that it should be done. So we'll read those halachot, but have in mind that all these halachot, many of these halachot relate to a situation where there's no Hevra Kadisha, there's no special group of people who take care of the burial. We took a short break to ask this question, and I want to answer. The reason that we go through shulhan-arukh and not through the abridged versions like Rabbi Lamb's or Yalkut Yosef or others is that when people read the clear-cut halakha, the final halakha, they do not understand the concept of flexibility or the wiggle room that the rabbi or the mourner have. And not only in this halakha, in every halakha, they see black and white. It says, for example, in the first volume of Yalkut Yosef, it says you have to get early in the morning to do tikkun hatzot, to do this mystical prayer that you do, a little before or after midnight. So now, someone who reads it from there and say, okay, I have to do it. What am I going to do? I'm going to get up in the morning and do it. But that's not how it works. We have to know where does it come from, who does that, and what period it was created. So as we went through the halachot and we go to shulhan-arukh, we realize we have a lot of minhagim, a lot of customs that were abandoned that we don't do today, and that means that, especially regarding Avelut, this is something that keeps on morphing, keeps on changing according to the needs of the community. Shmuel, you're saying that I'm hearing that Birthright does that. Do they tear their own garments, or they get special T-shirts from Birthright, which they do when they get to the Temple Mount?
I don't remember. It was a YouTube video. I would have to go back and
okay. Okay,
look.
It's possible.
I think it was their own garments. I don't think it was a Birthright shirt.
Interesting. It's possible that they did it in order to instill the idea in them, or maybe it was specific groups. Most people don't do that. It's hard for me to look at that, because as someone who grew up in Yerushalayim, and I was born in 1965. So in 1967, Yerushalayim was united. So I don't remember much of that time, except for what my father told me, that he took me under fire from the nursery. Shells were falling on the street where we were living. But I think when I turned 5 or 6, that's when I started walking with my grandfather, Hacham Shol Fetaya, to the Kotel. So we would walk every Shabbat. And I could tell you that you walk to the Kotel, what you feel, you don't feel the sorrow for the destruction. You feel tremendous joy of being able to be there. I think that is where we're coming from. I think that is the major change what happened between the 1800s, when the Jews came from Europe for the first time, and that's also why it was more of a problem for the Ashkenazi Yishuv than the Sephardim. Sephardim always lived in Eretz Yisrael. They traveled back and forth from Damascus, from Lebanon, from Iraq. It was part of the Ottoman continuum, so they kept visiting. So for them, it was okay. We are used to that. We know that this is what it is, and we're lucky to be here. People who dreamt about the Yerushalayim and came from afar and they saw what they saw, they felt the sorrow for the destruction. And in modern times, as we went, the establishment of the State of Israel, the War of Independence, the Sheshet Hayamim, the 1967 war, etc. We look at Yerushalayim and we say, we're lucky to have that. We could be better, right? But we should not live in sorrow and agony. And to that, I had also, the famous, we have this bracha that is recited on Tisha B'Av, right? Nahem Hashem et Avelet Zion v'Yerushalayim. Send comfort to those who mourn for Zion and Yerushalayim. That there has been a debate around this bracha. Do we have to say it the same way today? Because the bracha speaks about Ha'ira Hareva v'Shomema Mibeli Banea Yoshevet v'Yival'ua Ligyonim v'Yirashua, the city which is desolate and destroyed and it dwells alone without her children, and it was swallowed and destroyed by the legions of foreign armies. How can you say that when Yerushalayim is thriving and flourishing? So Rabbi David Shlush indeed wrote a new nusach, an updated nusach for that, and I think that in general we are moving away from that towards a new era in terms of how we assess Yerushalayim, and in general, not regarding the temple, we are relatively lucky compared to previous generations in the way that we have to deal with death. I mean, there are tragic things happen all the time, but there's no comparison to the constant fear and uncertainty that people lived in the past. So that's why our attitude has also shifted a little bit, but still, I think important, as I mentioned, like with Kubler-Ross's book and other books, is to even though it's in certain ways it's easier for us not to ignore it, not to try to push it aside. We have to address it. We have to speak about it, and to help people display their mourning. So we're going back to Siman 341. shulhan-arukh says this: if someone lost a relative for whom he must mourn, it says before the burial he eats in another house. If he doesn't have where to, he eats in a house of a friend. And I mean, they go through all the rules of how that person is going to eat. If he eats in a friend's house, if not, he makes a partition and eats solely. He has to eat separately from other people. He does not eat meat or drink wine. He doesn't say the blessing before the meals or the grace after meals. And I mean, there are a lot of rules here of exemptions for that person. It says upatur mikol mitzvot amurat b'Torah. It's basically is exempt for all the mitzvot of the Torah. Va'afilu im eno tzarich la'asok b'tzorchei hamet, kigon sheyesh lo acherim she'oskim b'shvilo. Even if he himself does not have to take care of the burial, because there are other people who do it for him. Now, this is not exactly what we have today. When that halacha was said, every person would take care physically of the burial of their relatives, right? And when they say there are other people who do it for him, they're talking about servants or hired hands. Today, with Hava Kadisha, everything is different. People are still, of course, distracted and confused and in a haze when that happens. Even when they thought they were anticipating it, organizations, chaplains, rabbis, sometimes funeral homes are doing a better job in preparing people, but still on the days of, people usually don't know what to do, and they're a little confused. And that's what the halakha says. The halakha means that because of that state of mind, one is exempt from saying all that. But remember, all these things that are mentioned here are rabbinical. The one thing that is a sort of biblical is tefillin, that he's not allowed to wear. He's not allowed to wear his tefillin. But on Shabbat, all these things don't apply. If this happened on Shabbat, one can do all these things: eat regularly, drink wine, and eat meat. Now we'll talk more later about meat and wine. There are different customs about that regarding in among different communities, whether the mourners are allowed to have meat and wine during the Shiva. Some say that they can because it's a sign of great joy. Others say that it's not today. It's not joy, and we'll see that there are different customs regarding that. מי שמת לומד בשבת יאכל במוצאי שבת בלא הבדלה ולא יתפלל ולא בבוקר קודם קבורה ולאחר קבורה יתפלל תפילת שחרית אם לא עבר זמנה. One who suffered a bereavement on Shabbat, he may eat on the night following the Shabbat without the havdalah. Then there must something missing here. It's he should not pray here. Those words are missing. He should not pray before in the evening, not in the morning. If he has time after the burial, he could pray then. I would say that from what I've seen and the way I feel it is done today, also in most places, people do pray, people do put on tefillin, because it's even though we have that kind of state of mind of confusion, all that, you know that the Hevra Kadisha or the funeral home are taking care of that, and that is not your obligation. And this is what Halacha 3 says: Makom shonagim shekatafim miyuhadim lotzi amet. There are special people, the pallbearers, who take care of the person who passed away. Then all these halachot are different. So now we have even more than that. Today, the funeral homes and the Hevra Kadisha take care of everything. The relatives, really, the only thing that the relatives do is to say goodbye to the person who passed away, and in most cases they won't see the deceased again until the burial. So all these halachot of onenut are a little different today, and one, if that happens, that the burial is delayed, then those halachot don't apply. Meaning, what happens when, and we should talk about it now, when we're still on aninut, what happens when someone passes away, and there are relatives who are coming from out of town, or for whatever reason the burial should be delayed. So there will be situations where you will hear that the Hevra Kadisha or others are pushing very hard for the burial to be as soon as possible, because of that, though the relatives are going to lose, are not going to have the opportunity to be at the burial. Now, in case that happens, I think we mentioned also in our discussion at the beginning, there are two considerations here. There are two concepts that have to be brought into focus. One is kavod hamet, and the other one is kavod ha'chayim. It's called Yikara de-shachvei, Yikara de-hayei. The honor and the respect of those who passed away, and the honor and respect of those who are alive. So, just as we want to respect the person who passed away, we want to respect those who are alive and give them the opportunity to come and be there at that moment. Of course, if someone says I can't come, until a month would pass, that probably you shouldn't wait there. But there were situations when we had to wait 2 or 3 days. It's not the end of the world for the person who passed away, because the neshama has already left the body. The neshama is in a good place. Those who argue for immediate burial say that as long as the body is not back into the ground, the soul suffers. But they would have a really hard time to explain the burial of Yaakov that got delayed by 6 months. So we have to deal with all these things with common sense and with balance. But this definitely the state of the relatives during those days. Once it was decided the burial will be, let's say, 3 days in advance, and we know that Hevra Kadisha takes care of everything, they are not called onenim. They should follow all the mitzvot regularly, prayers, whatever it is, and just await the moment of the burial. So with that, we'll conclude today, and God willing, we'll continue next week on the regular time on Thursday.